We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, but neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced.
The background of the story is the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's actually a fairly personal movie for me because I was the age of the kids in the movie in 1962 on that fateful weekend that we literally thought there was going to be no school on Monday and no school ever again because the world was going to end.
Okay, people, this may not be a drill. Single file, quickly. You assume the duck and cover position with your head down and no talking. Single file, let's move.
I can't stress enough how much you probably can't conceive of what it's like to actually think that the world is going to end, but it was very heavy. The major radiation movies of the period were them and Tarantula and The Amazing Colossal Man, The Incredible Shrinking Man. I mean, that was the atomic fear era, and those movies were all telling us that there was this atomic power was not quite what it was being sold to us as, and that there was a lot of stuff to think about atomic power, that it wasn't entirely our friend the atom all the time. Okay, so since this is the period that we're talking about, one of the props in the movie that the kids read is Famous Monsters of Filmland. This is the issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland where I actually have an article printed. It actually was a letter that I wrote, but they printed it as an article about the 50 worst horror movies ever made. What am I going with? What does that mean?
Open it up.
Oh. And so it actually they did a long, big Dante's Inferno. That was it. That was the name of the article. Boy, it smells just like 1962. Anyway, the idea was that I had written a lot of letters trying to get my name in print like everybody else did, and I wrote about the best horror movies I ever saw, and I wrote about 100 different things, and finally I got around to the worst horror movies, some of which I hadn't actually seen. But anyway, they picked that up, and this was my first printed stuff. And it was in 1962, as a matter of fact, the same year as the Cuban Missile Crisis. Probably precipitated the whole thing. This is the issue of that the kid carries in the movie, because this is the issue that was out at the time when the events took place. Later, I kind of outgrew Famous Monsters, as many of our readers did, and wrote for a magazine called Castle of Frankenstein, which, what does this say? This is a more typical example of Castle of Frankenstein, and it was a much more sophisticated magazine. In fact, the first issue of it, they just reprinted things from Sight and Sound, but I had never seen Sight and Sound, so I thought this is pretty classy. So I started writing for them, and unfortunately, the magazine was very badly distributed, and they were so desperate for newsstand space that they would end up putting things like the Joker on the cover of what was supposed to be a horror magazine. It lasted a while, and there's some very good stuff in it. It's very hard to get. It's kind of a collector's item now. But I digress. This was one of many props in the movie that came from my own personal closet. Posters on the wall that the kid has. Those are my posters. Drawings on the wall. Those are drawings that I did when I was a kid. The 8mm films that he's got in his room, those are the ones that I collected. And so there's a lot of verisimilitude in the movie. Got to remember that in the 60s, being a monster kid meant going to the movies and seeing monster movies that you would not see again for 5 years at least until they went on television. And then once they did go on television, if you didn't catch them, if they were on at 11:30 at night, you had to make sure that you could stay up and watch it, because it wasn't going to be on again for months and months and months and months. It's not like what you have today, which is the idea that you can see a movie anytime you want, you can own it, you can buy it, you can stream it, you couldn't do any of that stuff then. And so we were all very lucky to be able to have the opportunity to get TV Guide every week and write down what the things were that were on and try to figure out ways in order to see them, especially if they were on while you were in school, because there were no tape. But it was still a very exciting period, and a lot of these movies were coming onto TV for the first time, and there were a lot of terrific movies that were playing on Saturday matinees. So it really was, it was a lot of fun.
What, do you spend your whole life sitting in monster movies?
A lot, yeah.
Somebody like Herb or Vincent Price. Or someone. It's like they're my friends.
Strange group. What are your real friends like?
I don't have too many. My dad's in the Navy, so we move all the time.
The character that Simon Fenton plays, who's the lead in the picture, is very much like me in that he moves around a lot, which I did because my father was a golf pro. His father is in the Navy. And I had a little brother just about the same age as the kid who plays his little brother in the movie. So the one thing I didn't have that they had was I didn't have any horror movie filmmakers coming to my neighborhood to plug their new movie, which was very sad. And I didn't live in Key West. I lived in New Jersey. But nonetheless, everything else about the movie is pretty autobiographical.
I knew it.
It is one of my most personal movies. I don't know that that necessarily, on its face, makes it better than the other movies, but it does have a certain amount of heart in it. And a lot of affection for movies, which I think has communicated itself over the years to various audiences. When my partner Mike Fennell and I got the script for the first time, it was a somewhat different kind of a movie. It was about a haunted movie theater where a bunch of people who went to the theater when they were kids come back and reminisce about what happened to them inside the theater as the theater is about to be torn down for a video store. And there's a vampire usher, and there's a matron who's sort of a monster, and it was a cute movie, but we couldn't get it made. Nobody wanted to make it. And when Charlie Haas, who had written Gremlins 2, came on board, we said we want to revamp this and try to make it into something else. And that's when the idea of making it more realistic came about, while still keeping the idea of what had originally been a horror movie actor who was coming to town, who's now a horror movie director. And it became a much more, quote, serious movie and less of a fantasy.
Yes, the atomic bomb is terrible. But more terrible still are the effects of atomic mutation. Hello, I'm Lawrence Woolsey. And I want to warn you about something that could happen.
When I asked John Goodman about being in this movie, I figured that I would have to reacquaint him with William Castle and the gimmicks and the whole character that he was playing, and I did not have to. I had a whole reel of trailers I was going to show him. He said, "You don't have to show me that stuff. I know who William Castle is." And he was already, he just inhabited the part. I mean, he just became this character. And I think it's, not to sound full of myself, but I happen to think it's one of the best roles he ever had.
Hey, Navy here is a walking encyclopedia. My name's Gene.
I had worked with Omri Katz on Erie, Indiana, and I enjoyed him, and he was a good kid, and I thought, now he was a little bit older, and I thought he would be perfect for one of the parts in this movie. But what people don't know about this picture is the lead kid, Simon Fenton, is British, and he's doing an American accent through the entire film, and is completely convincing as an American. We shot Mant first so that we would have something to project in the theater. So I convinced my friends William Shallert and Kevin McCarthy and Robert Cornthwaite, who was the scientist in The Thing, to not take billing at all, because have it be like extended cameos. And we shot it in black and white and tried to emulate the style of 50s movies, not necessarily Castle, but just that kind of 1950s studio-bound movie with lots of shadows on the wall. And we, of course, had a giant ant in it. And giant ants have always appealed to me since I saw them when I was a kid, which scared me to death. And I was convinced there were giant ants outside my window because the crickets sounded like ants. And then there would be these tree branches that would hit my window pane, and I was sure that those were ant antennas. So I had a certain innate connection with ants. And what I didn't want to do was I didn't want to have deliberately crappy special effects, because a lot of the movies that I liked when I was a kid actually had pretty good special effects for the period, and you really wanted to believe that was a giant spider walking down the road in the desert. You didn't want to be able to see through them. You didn't want you didn't want to spoil the illusion. Now, obviously, when you get to grasshoppers crawling over pictures of skyscrapers, the illusion is broken. But I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to make that kind of picture. So the special effects in Mant are actually not bad, and they were done by people, of course, who love the genre. Even when we went to do the trailer for Mant, we used the same phrases and the same typeface from actual trailers that we just copied and put right in it. That's why there's so many different kinds of typefaces. And of course, it's a style of trailer that you don't see anymore, but it's very accurate.
Any ant would react to a small dose in the same way. You're just seeing it in a magnified, or larger form.
Some of the dialogue in Mant is verbatim from other movies, and particularly Burt Gordon movies, because they had a special quality all their own in that he would his characters would often explain the use of words within a sentence. So if they used a word that might be over the heads of the kids, they would explain it in the same sentence as he's growing at an accelerated or speeded up rate.
Just as the radiation, which is measured in units called Roentgens, was released.
Which made for some fun. Well, Matinee, I was surprised that it wasn't it sounds like a French word to me, matinee. But then when the DVD came out in France, or the movie was released in France, it wasn't called Matinee, it was called Panic on Florida Beach. And I guess the word matinee is not a French word. The tradition of the matinee was that in order to get kids into the movie-going habit, theaters would run a special program on Saturday of 10 cartoons and 2 features. Sometimes it was one of the features they'd run that week. Sometimes it was a revival of a Tarzan movie or a horror movie or something like that. And the kids would come and get in the habit of paying 25 cents and going to the movies every weekend. In Matinee, it's a little unusual in that I don't think most previews of a movie would take place in the daytime. But it seemed to work for our story, and so we decided to have a matinee preview instead of a nighttime preview, so all the kids could be there.
Lawrence Woolsey is coming here?
That's right. Tell all your little friends.
Wow. Wow.
You know, in those days, neighborhood theaters simply wanted to get kids to get used to going to the movies, and today the theaters are not owned by mom and pop organizations anymore. They're owned by big corporations, and they're very tightly scheduled, and every time they book a movie, they have to run it as often as possible so that the studio will be happy, and there's no way that they're not going to run their big blockbuster that they just booked so that they can run some special thing for kids. That disappeared in the 70s. There's a big close-up of Robert Cornthwaite at the end when all the action is taking place in the theater. And it looks apocalyptic, and he says, "It's a different world now from the one we knew just a few short years ago." And I found that that line haunts me. You could say it anytime, anywhere, and it's always true.
Because?
Because it's always true.
It's a different world now from the one we knew only a few short years ago.
No, it wasn't meant about the movie business. It was just meant about things in general.
Things in general.
And it's true, and of course it's true about the movie business as well. We added the helicopter shot at the end because we felt it brought the movie to a better close than just the kids going to the beach, which is how it used to end. And we added that shot, and I think it's resonant because it's the same kind of helicopter that was used in Vietnam, and it obviously foretells the future of probably a number of the characters in the movie. Now that I think of it, I did have Final Cut. Not that it's that interesting, but you're right, I did. So I can't complain about it. It is what it is. Mant, half man, half ant, all terror.